Okay, good evening, everybody. And today's episode of the Product Angle Show, we are talking to Lena. Lena is a product manager who turned into an entrepreneur recently. So to begin with, Lena has 7 years of experience in startups and startup-like teams in language testing, fintech, customer experience management, productivity, e-commerce, and idea validation. She is an author of a self-published book and is working on multiple projects. Welcome, Lena.
Thanks so much. Happy to be here.
Thank you. So let's get started. What made you want to leave a good paying job, to become a full-time entrepreneur?
Great question. So I just actually finished writing a blog post that's going to be part of a multi-part series on my website about essentially my entrepreneurial journey. So the first blog post is, I think it's called Bye Bye Corporate World, Hello Entrepreneurial Roller Coaster. And so I've been wanting to kind of start my own company for a long time now, but I just never really knew exactly how to do it. And so my last job was actually working as a product manager running an innovation team. And it was really exciting because we were doing basically a lot of entrepreneurial stuff. So looking at new market opportunities for the company, ideating on new products, prototyping products, showing them to customers. I love that job. Unfortunately, 6 months into that job, the leadership changed and they ended up not deciding to go forward with the innovation team. So it's kind of a bit of a turning point for me. I was like, do I go get another job, or is this kind of the hint in life to just go after it and try and kind of do my own thing on the side? So that was really the catalyst that happened. And the reason I decided to just kind of outright quit instead of trying to pursue projects on the side was I was really worried that if I was doing things on the side, I still had so much to learn about, sales and, landing pages. How do you actually launch a product when you're kind of a single entrepreneur? And I was also worried that my job would kind of become a crutch and I would, not really work on my side projects because I knew I had a job. And I wanted to take advantage of that momentum right when it was kind of fresh in my mind. So that's what led me to basically just after working for 7 years and never taking even a break between two jobs to just kind of walking away from the corporate world and entering the roller coaster that is the entrepreneurial journey.
Fair enough. It must have been, walk me through that thought process, evaluation criteria, because obviously, when you're going from a good paying job in the US, our healthcare is tied to, our employer. In Canada, obviously it's not. But talk me through some of that evaluation criteria that you use to make that jump.
Sure. Yeah. So the first thing was, I've worked for 7 years, so I have some work experience. I felt like, if I go out into the world and I, as an entrepreneur and I don't really make it essentially as quickly as I wanted to, I knew that I could probably find a job when I came back decently. It's not like I was a fresh grad or something where it'd be more challenging. The other piece is I'm actually super fortunate because I own the apartment that I live in. I don't have a mortgage. So that's a huge cost that I didn't have to worry about. And my partner, who's absolutely amazing, he has a great job and he was more than supportive of my endeavor. And so I knew that from a financial perspective, I could afford to give myself a year, 6 months to a year runway to really just essentially learn and not really have to be forced to generate any revenue. The other piece is, I really wanted to take advantage of the momentum of feeling like I wanted to leave that job and having the confidence. I was worried that if I waited any longer, that I wouldn't feel that kind of pull anymore. So I really wanted to take advantage of that. Those are pretty much kind of my evaluation criteria. I must admit, though, it wasn't really a well thought out process. It happened over 2 days. My mentor was basically like, you know what you want to do, just do it. And I was like, okay. 2 days later, I was like, I'll just quit my job. I wanted to do something a little unpredictable after 7 years of diligent corporate work.
Fair enough. Was the book that you published, self-published, was that your first product per se, or, what was it? Walk me through, you've quit your job now, did you know what you wanted to build, or, how did you start building your first product, or what was your first product?
Sure. Yeah. So the book was actually my second product. The first product I started building a couple weeks after I left my job. So when I was leaving my job, I actually had no plan. I had no product idea. I had a couple ideas kind of percolating in my head, but nothing concrete. It's not like I had, the beginnings of a business that I was going into. It was purely just, I'm just going to leave and I'll just figure it out and I'll learn. So my first product was actually called Hippokite. It's like a hippo and a kite. It's super weird. I don't know why I named my things so strangely, but the tool was basically something that would help people document their accomplishments throughout their career and then be able to kind of create a library of their experience and then be able to draw on that when they have performance reviews or job applications or networking opportunities. I ended up running a really small beta for it. It was a really bad taped together beta. It was like Google Sheets and like some manual work. It was absolutely terrible, but I had some really awesome beta testers, so it was a cool experience. But it didn't really work out. I didn't really kind of, achieve what I wanted out of the beta in terms of adoption. I didn't really know whether there was kind of an opportunity there, especially as like a B2C product. And so the book was actually my way of kind of dealing with that first failure and going back to something that was a little more comfortable for me, which is writing. I've written before. My dad's written books. So I was like, okay, I'll just give this thing a shot. I'll write a book. So it didn't actually I didn't even plan to write the book. I just was originally going to write a blog post about how to get into product management because I had a lot of product managers that were asking me, how did you get into it? How did this person get into it? So I thought I'll just interview a bunch of people and make it easier for them. And as I started interviewing these people, the stories just got more and more interesting. And so I kind of just on a whim, again, decided, I'll just turn this into a book. So then over the next 6 months, I worked on that and actually finished it and self-published it and launched it. So that was kind of my first, semi-successful product that it actually delivered from start to finish.
Fair enough. What's your current product right now?
Right now, I'm working on Hypothesisly. So it's a little tracker tool for venture teams going through startup accelerators to help them track all their hypotheses as they go through their customer discovery, take notes during customer interviews, and then amalgamate all those key learnings from their customer interviews into a format that they can easily compare and also give visibility to their mentors.
What kind of user research did you do before building this?
Good question. So it actually came from kind of a personal need. So I'd recently worked on a e-commerce project last year that I invalidated and no longer decided to pursue the opportunity in around mid-November. So when I was kind of letting go of that project, I was about to start testing my own ideas. And I wanted to take a really hypothesis-based approach, as I usually do, but I was going to test multiple ideas. So I wanted a system that I could actually document all this stuff, track my hypotheses, automate some of the stuff, bringing in the customer interview learnings and stuff like that. So I got my boyfriend just to kind of start building a really simple prototype in Google Sheets for me. And then I was also mentoring, and I still do, I mentor at the Startup Accelerator at UBC here in Vancouver. And I started to notice that the teams were really struggling with kind of putting these spreadsheets together, the multiple Google Docs and all the organization. And as a mentor, I couldn't really see what they were doing. So I didn't feel like I could help them. So I actually started interviewing them and trying to figure out, how are you doing this process? What are the challenges? And through that, I did uncover they were spending a lot of time on this admin work. So I think I interviewed about 10 venture teams and 4 mentors, and that was pretty much it. Because the prototype only took 2 weeks to put together, I was like, I don't really need to do some crazy validation here. Plus it solves a personal pain of mine. So I just figured I'll just roll with it and create this prototype and see where it goes. But if it was a more ambitious project, I definitely do more kind of heavier idea validation. Yeah.
Fair enough. What's your perspective on market research and competitors? Do you, for Hypothesisly, do you have competitors that you've looked at, and how do you look at market research as a general factor?
Good question. Yeah, I think it's really tough because some people say, don't pay attention to the competitors too much, just kind of do your own thing. Other people are like, no, absolutely know exactly what everyone's doing in the market. When I was working on my e-commerce project, I did some preliminary competitive landscape and competitive analysis before we kind of dived into the heavier customer discovery. And I uncovered some competitors, which was really useful because we were planning on building like a big drop shipping platform. And so I really wanted to see, what are people doing? How can we differentiate? What are people saying about those platforms that they like and don't like? And then what was interesting was as I did customer discovery and talked to my target customers, they uncovered more and more competitors for me, which I found really interesting because they're in the industry, so they know what's going on, right? So with that, I did, I think, a little bit more extensive competitive research. For Hypothesisly, again, because it sort of came out of a personal pain and the prototype was really quick to throw together, I didn't really do that much research. I know of some platforms that are a little more kind of, I'd call them enterprise level, that do full kind of product validation and customer discovery, and they have all these automations and stuff. But I'll admit, I actually didn't do that much competitive research for Hypothesisly, probably because it originated as a passion project. So I wasn't like, I need to make money with this thing. Yeah.
That makes sense. What's your approach to building products? Because you've mentioned a couple of times quickly put together an MVP. So it sounds like you're more about quick experiments, get something out there and build in public. But we won't touch the building public part. Just talk me through your approach to building right now.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's constantly changing, and the approaches I've used in the past and even recently, I've kind of again taken a different view on things. But I mean, for me, where I really struggle is I think people sometimes it's just a lot easier to put something in front of people, either in the form of a landing page or in the form of like a clickable prototype or like an MVP if you actually have something. And the reason for that is, first of all, people actually understand what the product is about if you kind of put it in front of them. And the second thing is, as they start using it, they'll start telling you what they need more of and what they don't like. So I really believe in kind of that lean startup methodology. But with that being said, I do really think that you run the risk of actually kind of building an abstract product that doesn't really necessarily resonate with the audience. So I've kind of shifted my thinking recently in terms of focusing on sort of like the audience first approach that, for example, Arvid Kahl, who's the author of Zero to Sold, he's a huge kind of audience first guy. So I've been reading a lot of his stuff and I've kind of pivoted into thinking like maybe the right way to go is to pick some sort of a segment that you identify with, really get to know them, understand their problems, and then try and find solutions that you can build to fulfill their needs.
Yeah.
But it really depends. I do still really think there's a space for experiments. Like I'm really into landing page experiments these days. Okay. I'd love to do a little more of those. So I think, it really depends. And I think it depends on your business. It depends on you. And I think the best way to figure out what works for you is really just to experiment with different things. And that's what I'm doing. And I'm still figuring it out.
Fair enough. Now, as a relatively new entrepreneur, I know the answer, what you're going to tell me, but have you ever thought that if you build in public, someone's going to steal your idea? Because, working with younger founders who are maybe first-time founders, that's one of the things I've heard numerous times. Now, I know you build in public. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's definitely a common thing that we hear. And sometimes someone will reach out to me and be like, hey, I want to get your, feedback on some customer discovery stuff. And I'm like, what are you working on? And they're just like, oh, I'm working on an accountability tool. And I'm like, I don't know what that is, right? I hope you're going to tell me more about it because I can't help you. And that's really the key thing. It's like, if you don't really share your ideas with people, you're not going to get that feedback. And I think the fear of people stealing your ideas, like I do think there's a time and place for that. If you're working on something that's, renowned and cutting edge and you're the only one using some new certain technology or an approach or like a new niche that you've uncovered, sometimes maybe there is a time and place to be a little secretive if you're really trying to build like a unicorn out of it or something. But most ideas, unfortunately, are just not that, interesting or renowned and attractive for everyone to work on, not to mention the fact that it's the actual execution that matters. Like people have a million ideas, but can you actually execute it? And can you actually get the distribution to get it in front of people? So I think weighing the pros and cons, if you share your ideas in public or with whoever you're chatting with on a regular basis, the benefits that you're going to get from their feedback and their impressions and their ideas on where else that could be used to solve problems is going to far outweigh the cons of someone potentially taking your idea and then doing it better than you. And honestly, if someone can take some of my ideas and do it better than me, then, you know, maybe they deserve to actually work on that product idea and actually go work on something else. So maybe it's a signal you're not really the right person for it.
Sure, that's absolutely true. So I'd like to talk a little bit about building in public, because it means a lot of different things to different people, and it's, you know, scary for some. Some people do it all the time. What does building in public mean to you, and how do you do it?
Sure, yeah. So I think when we say building in public, classically we think about, you know, posting everything on Twitter, or maybe you have like a open analytics startup or something, or you're, you know, you have a newsletter where you're sharing everything to a certain group of people. I think for me, there's different levels. There's of course the whole, you know, broadcasting it to the world. Here's all my screenshots. Here's all my drawings. Here's exactly what I'm doing, including the tech I'm using, which takes a certain amount of courage for sure. But there's also different levels. For me, what I did, for example, when I was working on my e-commerce project, I was working with 2 other partners. So like, it wasn't really appropriate for me to now be like tweeting about it everywhere. But what I did is I just ended up like connecting with a bunch of people in my network. They referred me to other people in e-commerce. And my whole thing was like, anyone that I interact with, I'll mention what I'm working on. And that to me was building in public, because I'm essentially just being very transparent and open about it. And that greatly kind of increased my opportunities. I will say, though, that the one thing that can get really overwhelming with any level of building in public is just the sheer feedback and ideas that you get back. It's not really the criticism. Everyone always thinks like, oh, I'm going to build in public or I'll share my idea and everyone will tell me how terrible it is. Some people, you know, thanks to them, they're actually honest and they'll be like, I'm not really sure about this, but people usually aren't going to be negative about it. The thing that you'll find is they're just going to want to bombard you with more ideas, which is really cool. And that's the reason to do it. But sometimes that can be really overwhelming, because now you're like, like I can go in like 16 different directions and I don't know what to do. And this person tells me this. And so you have to kind of really prepare yourself for understanding that you're going to get a lot of feedback and you're going to get a lot of ideas and it can be overwhelming. But more importantly, number 2, you're actually going to have to make the decisions on your own at the end of the day, and knowing that your decisions are your decisions and these are just opinions that you use as data to kind of drive you forward. But there's definitely different levels. So there's different levels for different types of folks.
Definitely. Now, what's your thought process on failing in public? You know, being Indian, we're often seen as we cannot fail in public because it's seen as a bad thing in the Asian culture. But I think it's changing over time. But generally speaking, you know, aunties like to talk that, oh, your kid did this or your kid did that. So that's something that I've heard quite frequently from young entrepreneurs as well, that, you know, I don't want to fail in public. How do you feel about that? And what are your thoughts on that? And before I actually forget, we have a viewer, and Masab, he says, this is awesome, Lena.
Oh, great. So, hey, Masab. Yeah, so failing in public. So gonna be brutally honest, I don't know that I've really just fallen flat on my face, failed in public yet. That definitely takes
don't take it. I wasn't suggesting that you failed in public. It was just something that I
hope that I could be courageous enough to fail in public. But I think honestly, and this is actually a topic that I'm really passionate about, I really don't think that it's talked about enough. It's really not. Like, I don't know if you know Drew Riley. He has like the Trends VC newsletter. So great newsletter, all tech trends, so many subscribers. He's monetized it amazingly. I think he recently actually hired like a distribution analyst to help him distribute the content. So he's doing excellent.
Okay.
He's amazing. So when you look at him, you're like, oh, you know, he has this great newsletter. He has it all figured out. But if you actually listen to a podcast with him on Indie Hackers, or read the the creator spotlight on Gumroad, I'm pretty sure he was basically in an entrepreneurial desert for, I think, almost like 32 months or something. He basically did so. If you go on his website, he has a bunch of projects that he did. He essentially made no income for a really long time. And then he finally found this thing. He probably had about like 10 projects that he did before. Same with a guy called Alex West, who I follow on Twitter. Huge fan of him too. He did, I think, 19 projects before he found Cyber Leads. But it's always, so Alex West, for example, he writes every day on his blog. He's very, very transparent. But a lot of makers, I think they're still really embarrassed by it, just because society still doesn't A, accept it, and B, doesn't really get it that your first things are not going to work. Most entrepreneurs, it's always at least the third project. So my kind of goal with hopefully building and failing more in public is to show that, the first thing you try and the first couple things you try is not going to work. And I think that narrative needs to be more exposed, because people still are really scared, because the expectation is that, your business is just going to work out, even though subconsciously we know it doesn't. So I think we still have a way to get there. I think it's easy to talk about your, 10K MRR in public.
Yeah.
And when you're building in the early stages of an idea, but when it kind of starts to fail, you start to kind of disappear a little bit. But I'd love to see that narrative kind of come out a little more.
Definitely, I agree with you. I think that's something that needs to be spoken about more. Now, I want to shift gears into sales, because as a product manager, we work with sales teams. We understand, or somewhat are aware of the sales process. At least we should be, in my opinion. Of the user's sales journey, how they buy, etc. But as an entrepreneur now, you're actually building and selling. Talk us through some of your sales experiences. And before you do that, I just want to quickly bring up the fact that a lot of times many people are scared to call, DM, email, people. But I think, in my opinion, is if it's done correctly, it adds value and you can start a conversation. And the way you're on this show right now is, I saw your book being, on Twitter. You was writing about your book and, things on Twitter. So I figured, you meet the description of people that I'd like to interview who are young, in their product or entrepreneur type journeys, someone who's relatively new, starting out. And I figured, how can I make that cold email? I was thinking of emailing you to ask you if you'd like to be on the show. So I was trying to figure out an angle to try and provide value to you, at the same time invite you on the show. And then one morning I got a DM from you asking if I'd be interested in having you on the show. And I thought, of course.
While you were trying to figure out the angle to get me on the Product Angle show, I beat you to the chase. That's super hilarious story. I love the origin of how this podcast happened. So sales is definitely an interesting topic to me. So full disclosure, I used to have a completely incorrect view of sales. I thought it was just annoying people that are trying to push something onto you that you don't want. I never really worked with a lot of sales teams, like a little bit at my last job, but I never had a lot of interaction. So I didn't really understand like the actual strategy and tactics that go into it. And when I first quit my job, I didn't really even understand that I would have to directly be doing sales, right? So I've completely shifted my thinking on sales. And I think, and it's not just about selling like a product to a person. It's also selling yourself, selling your content, selling your thoughts. And, there's so much that goes into selling. That's not just the dollar amount of the product that you're selling. The way that I kind of started doing sales, especially when I was doing my e-commerce project, that was probably my first really big experience where I was solely in charge of kind of getting these potential early leads for this product that we were trying to build to validate the willingness to pay. And I initially started with, I guess throughout the whole project, I was doing kind of like cold outreach. And it worked relatively well. I think, I read a bunch on cold outreach and templates and how to make it personalized and compelling and what tools to use and the email sequence, the idea that you have to actually, send multiple sales emails because people are busy, they forget, you have to remind them. Most people respond, I think over 60% of prospects respond on the second sequence email. So follow-up is literally where all the deals get done. But I've actually kind of changed my thinking since then. And when I can help it, I actually prefer to warm up the leads a little bit before. So whether that's through a mutual connection, or maybe I, add them on LinkedIn and start some sort of a conversation, maybe add value through content. There's a lot of different ways to do it. I've also become a really big fan of kind of digital ethnography. So it's where you basically observe people in their natural online habitat. So let's say what they're talking about on Twitter. So the goal really is to basically have people self-select and self-qualify themselves as your leads. Because some of the challenges I face with cold outreach is you reach out to someone, you're kind of guessing whether they're the right prospect unless you know exactly who you're targeting and they are that target. So you're going to get rejected a lot more, right? But if you actually kind of observe what people are doing in their natural habitat, or you somehow start a conversation that's going to let you qualify whether they're the right type of customer that you're talking to, you're going to actually go a much further way. Although people are so sensitive to being prospected these days, I had a funny kind of incident when I was working on my e-commerce project last year. I added the CEO of like an apparel company because I knew that he would have a lot of detailed information about the space that I was exploring, especially around drop shipping. I wasn't really trying to sell to them. Like, he was a little too big of a customer for me to be targeting at such an early stage, but he picked up on the fact that I was maybe prospecting. So he was a little bit harsh in the beginning. It was kind of like, oh, like, sounds like there's a consultant pitch about to drop. Like, what are you trying to sell me? And I was really intimidated, and I was like, because being on the other end of the sales, like, a lot of people are just like, are you trying to pitch to me? Don't pitch to me. And it's really hard. Yeah. But I kind of took a step back, and I was just like, you know what? I'm actually not trying to pitch to you. I'm just literally trying to find out information. I think you would have great information around that. And he actually ended up coming around and sent me like 4 massive paragraphs of like his thoughts around the drop shipping process and the challenges, which directly led me to invalidating my idea. But the whole reason I'm talking about this is, you're going to get rejected, and people are going to be a little harsh sometimes right off the bat. Sometimes they're just going to want you to disappear. But a lot of the time, like, you can kind of just turn the conversation around, and just by showing that you're an actual human being. So that's the biggest kind of learning for me is sales is, they say, sales is all about relationships, and we've heard it so much that it's kind of lost its effect now, but it really is true. Building those relationships is the only way that you can qualify your leads before you actually bother pitching to them, and actually warm them up before you're actually gonna target them. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, it's been fantastic talking with you. Now, before we leave, what advice would you want to give to somebody who's starting out, either building in public, building their own products? What advice, learnings would you give to them?
The biggest advice that I can give, which is the biggest mistake that I made over the last year, is pick a problem space and try to stick to that problem space. So I ended up kind of, doing a little bit here, doing a little bit there. I dipped into e-commerce for a bit, then I left e-commerce. The problem for me, I liked that I did that because I wanted to learn a bunch of different things. I wasn't like, I need to build a business immediately. But if you really do, if your goal is to kind of efficiently build a business, pick a problem space, get to know that community and what their challenges are. Start on one product idea. If it doesn't work out, just pivot it within that product space, because you can basically compound all your learnings and leverage that existing network, the knowledge of the industry. And if you look at most successful founders, you'll see that they picked a problem space, they built something in it. I recently read the story of the guy who started a Banner Bear, for example. He was like, I just care about image generation. That's all I care about. I'm just going to try and do something in this space. And it took a while, but after about a year and a half, he finally managed to create Banner Bear. And now it's making a lot of money, right? So my biggest advice is pick a problem space, stick in it, become an expert, get to know the audience, and then the product, after many pivots, will hopefully kind of emerge.
Well, thank you so much. And for those of you who are listening in, go follow Lena on Twitter at Lena Sasadic. It's been fantastic chatting with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.